something happening here. But what it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop, children.
And welcome to another episode of Occupy TV. I'm Joe Tyndall, and today we have James, Mari, and Moon with us, and we're going to be talking about occupying the trees. I guess we also have Guy Fawkes is with us, and for those of you who've seen V for Vendetta, it wrote, is it Remember, the 5th of November, the gunpowder treason and plot. I see no reason, what is it?
Gunpowder treason should
ever be forgot, yeah. So, tell us a little bit about Guy Fawkes.
Guy Fawkes attempted to blow up the Houses of Parliament in, was it 1506? Did we decide?
1605.
1605. I got my digits reversed. To be more precise, he was accused of attempting to blow up the Houses of Parliament. To this day, no one knows for sure if he was guilty, but he was sure made an example of. He was hung for several days and drawn and quartered. And to this day, people still burn an effigy of him every year on the 5th of November to criminalize him further. I wonder if he did it.
So, we don't know. So, tell us about occupying the trees.
So Occupy the Trees was designed and thought up around the environmental abuses of the 1%. And in thinking up this event that had taken place, we were drawing attention to the fact that the 1%, then their abuses against us as people and society and their fellow human beings takes the most, has the greatest footprint in nature and in the environment. And so that was the thinking to drawing this together, and taking to the trees for it is about the ally with trees as our partners, as partners in the plant world that represent and support life on this planet, our life, everybody's life.
Mm-hmm. So trees making oxygen, taking that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, making oxygen, making wood, making habitat, doing all those kinds of good things, right? And let's talk a little bit more about the 1%, who have been with us for about 12,000 years, which is when the first evidence of agriculture and animal husbandry showed up, so we could have permanent settlements, which means we could have surplus wealth. And then, at that point, suddenly we have a king who owns everything and slaves that own nothing. So we're still fighting that battle, aren't we?
We are. Definitely are.
So, other thoughts about the 1%?
The 1% have, in all of their abuses that they've perpetrated against all of us and our nation, committed the treason against our nation that they have by usurping the government powers and so on and so forth. So they could continue to use their practices and their corporations to further their own greed on the backs of everybody else. And yeah, so it had been obvious early on in the occupation that this wasn't very clear to a lot of people, the connection between the environmental abuses and the rape and degradation of our planet and our own ecosystems that we depend on. That people didn't really make the association, which made the organizing of this and putting this event together that much more important to do.
Mm-hmm. So you see a lot of people say, there's still a lot of trees, we can keep cutting them down, because there's still a lot. Any thoughts on new growth versus old growth and benefits of old growth?
There's not a lot in terms of wilderness and actual forest, particularly old growth versus new growth. We have a third left of what we started with or something. It's depleted really, really bad, and the
2%.
2%? Excuse me.
Well, that's of original old growth forests, so
right.
About 2%. But we have deforested huge sections of the country.
The whole world, wherever we want to exploit, and whatever people or other life forms are on that resource that we're just going to take, these corporations, they just go in and take this, and those people have no rights to it. They don't get anything out of it. That needed to be drawn attention to.
So in other words, it's a usurpation of the commons.
Totally.
Okay, where what's happened is, oh, there's something we can turn into a pile of money, and so we're going after it. And it's oil, it's copper, it's iron ore, it's aluminum, or it's whatever. it's whatever you need, and the uber rich will go after it because there's money to be made by doing so.
But the money doesn't, you can't eat it, you can't breathe it. And that's what concerns me personally, is the 1% are committing acts that harm themselves and their descendants, and they're denying not only their own humanity, but the humanity of the people they harm. To me, that's the behavior pattern of someone who's insane.
Yeah, but if they can hire a private army to protect themselves from the rest of us, then why should they care?
There's still more of us than there are of that private army.
I see. Okay. So, thoughts about the Occupy the Trees action. So what's that all about?
It's a week-long event of drawing attention to these abuses through tree sitting, through interaction with the trees, and then political slogans and actions, street theater, skits.
Education.
Lots of education.
Okay, so what sorts of things would the education be? If I was walking in and wasn't sure what this issue was about, I mean, one of the things that I've found as we go out into the community and start talking to people is that within our community, within the Occupy group and, all the related organizations, CALC and, Community Circle and, the list goes on and on and on of different groups within, the area. Everybody in there sort of knows what's going on. But when you start talking to the general public, there's a lot of information that's missed. In other words, we start talking about this stuff and you get blank stares because they're not sure what the issues are really about. So what's this one all about?
This one is about identifying in bioregion our locality. We all live in this Cascadia bioregion from Northern California up through Canada locally. And in doing that, in living in this place, it's important to identify, I feel, with that bioregion and to draw attention to that. So that's locally what we're doing here and what we've encouraged other occupiers who want to participate to also acknowledge their bioregion, their place on the earth, rather than those arbitrary political lines and such.
We should speak on the fact that it's a worldwide model,
right,
and how the other occupies, and not just occupies, but other forest defender groups have joined us.
The bottom line is the issues are too numerous to single out. Every Occupy the Trees has got issues in it, that to address wherever they may be. Of course, the Cascadia bioregion doesn't make sense to promote in Texas or Sweden. There will be local issues there.
Mm-hmm. But let's say 300 years ago we had walked up through the Willamette Valley. What would we have seen?
Wow.
It's not grassland.
No.
It would have just been forest.
Lots and lots of forest everywhere.
Just tree.
As far as the eye could see.
We would have seen the actual ecosystem that is now Cascadia and the bioregion in its natural form, which is absolutely nothing like it's evolved to today. It's now concrete and business and natural resources as income.
But even the farmland has been cleared. In other words, when you go back up, I grew up in New England, and we were into basically third growth in the area where I was. And there were all these trees, but there were stone walls everywhere, which meant that all of that area that was, these trees that were 75, feet tall or so, all of that area had been cleared. And it was all pasture land that had, just gone out of use as the agricultural areas moved to the west in the country. They just let it tree over and go back. But hardly a mature forest. I mean, there was Smaller growth. I mean, we had the occasional, large pine tree, but most of the other trees weren't, much more than about 6-8 inches in diameter. And so nationally, we've deforested almost the entire continent at least once, with the exception of the 2% that's left.
We do have the meadows that naturally occur near the water flows, the rivers and such. So there's either meadow or there's forest.
Yeah.
If it's all fully natural, there's nothing else. So you go from that water source, meadow, forest, and there you have it.
Yeah. So a lot of changes. And one of the things that I just finished up Master Gardener certification, and one of the things that was brought up in there was just how much carbon used to be in the soils in the United States, and that carbon has largely been mined out of the soils themselves. That normally in an ecosystem, the material all drops and decays and becomes part of, in other words, the growth becomes part of the soil over time, and there's funguses and bugs and whatever else you want to call it, turning all earthworms and whatever, turning all this stuff back into soil. And so a lot of the areas that we have deforested, and now we're planting, say, monoculture, we have mined not only the nitrogen out of the soil, which we go back and add every year as fertilizer, but we've mined the carbon out of the soil. And so a lot of that's made it into the air also as part of the greenhouse gas problem. But getting back to forestry, and which is, I guess, Occupy the Trees is largely focused on deforestation, clear cutting, forestry practices, and then I guess even things like pesticides, use of pesticides.
Definitely pesticides and removal of natural resources in the way of mining and that, which is just part of the forest picture.
Okay.
Somewhat, I wouldn't characterize it entirely about forests. It's environmental abuses across the whole planet, and the utilization of tree sits and trees as speaking points. It goes back to a very old point in our history as humans, that trees would be meeting places and trees were considered sacred and stuff like that, and specifically in terms of relating to that natural environment. So it's really more symbolic there to draw that attention than specifically about trees. In our particular bioregion, there's a lot of trees, like you're saying, with the deforestation, and so those issues are hot here. But the whole thing in its entirety is not entirely about deforestation.
But there's also all these links with other issues. For example, the whole foreclosure thing. One of the issues is Lane County, has largely been defunded. But if what happened, they are the keeper of the deeds. But if whenever a mortgage had been transferred, the fees to record the transfer had been paid, that's $4.2 million a year. Right. And if Lane County had the $4.2 million for the fees for recording, then they would not be suffering from the financial constraints that they're suffering from. And that's because the bank simply said, we own the stuff, we're not going to bother recording the deeds, we don't want to pay taxes, we don't want to pay recording fees, and all of a sudden, now we have Lane County needs some revenue, so of course there's this big push, if you squeeze them hard enough, they'll let you cut more trees down.
Right.
Could I speak on that for just a minute?
Absolutely not.
Got to. The broader, real major point with me on that is the statewide lack of funding for schools and everything that is so stressed and so scaled back. Education having no music, no PE, no nothing like that, because there's allegedly not any money for schools. But one of the big things that we want to educate and bring to the top of the awareness is that if you own 5,000 or more acres as a timber owner, you pay no taxes, you pay no export taxes, you pay nothing. And that's money that used to go straight to the schools that our governor has just taken away. Yeah. If you're a small property owner and you own less than 5,000 acres, you pay heavy taxation, you pay export taxes. And particularly those large property owners, are selling timber to China without paying any taxes or any kind of export fees whatsoever, that is not coming to the state, that is not coming to the schools, that is not coming to the counties, that is not coming to the kids, but it's going to China, and they are storing it in our logs in the water to sell back to us when we run out of trees. And that's what's the closest to my heart in this issue.
Yeah, plus they're shredding a lot of them, for chipping a lot of them, to make cardboard.
And that's another story.
Yeah, I mean, why are we chipping logs that could be used for construction that have, cordwood? I mean, it's really amazing. I was doing some energy research about a year ago, and wanted to look at how much wood was actually produced on an average acre nationally. And it turns out that there's only 20 cubic feet of cordwood produced on an average acre in the United States per year. It's 20 cubic feet. That's not very much. Most of the rest of it is in bark and needles and, slash, which is the branches and that kind of stuff. But true cordwood, it's only 20 cubic feet a year, which is...
And if they shred it, they can bring in the chemicals from Monsanto and all their other compadres to make resin, to make wood poison. Just saying.
Totally.
And you've got other things like, say, the Seneca plant. Now, they promised us at Seneca that they weren't going to burn any logs. However, the amazing thing is there's log trucks wandering in there. It's like, excuse me, folks, did we do a little lying here?
No, they never do that.
They never lie? Okay.
No.
Corporate America never lies? I see.
They're the good guys.
Yeah, okay.
Monsanto is our friend.
So tell us more about Monsanto.
Wow, I'm not the Monsanto expert, but basically I can only say they're the devil. They are in Oregon. Let's try to narrow it down to Oregon. Monsanto in Oregon, and the commercial helicopter companies, the timber barons, the banks that support the timber industry, GMOs, on and on. But Monsanto is literally in everything.
Yeah, that's true.
Glenmuir Organic Tomatoes at the local Sundance Market is owned by Monsanto. A lot of people think that if it's organic and it looks healthy, it's not part of that whole big scheme. It is. You can go into any Google search on how bad Monsanto is and look at the Monsanto Corporation umbrella and what's under it, and find stuff that I couldn't tell you in 3 hours. They're everywhere.
They are the developers of the
everything.
Terminator gene.
Yes, they are.
Okay, in other words, put it in seeds so that your plants will not produce seed, so you can't save seed,
Right.
which means you have to buy seed from Monsanto because you can no longer produce your own seed.
Exactly.
And worse yet, with the Monsanto bit, they also have, their whole thing is genetically engineering, perfect foods, as they like to sell them. And in doing that, that's another of their predatory practices in exploiting the 99% in especially a global kind of a way that they can ship food thousands of miles away and run farmers out in their own localities because of their way to ship things, and they can network it all with big companies and keep it very small, so they can drive little guy out of business and make you bad food and corner the market. So they're the only ones to do it.
And spray you with chemicals while you're standing in your organic garden.
And then there's that.
Yeah. And so when we talk about bad food, what does that mean? Because a lot of people just look and say, okay, well, if you have an organic apple and you have a non-organic apple, they both have the same nutrition, or so goes the claim. Because, when you look at it, you look on the little label and it says carbohydrates, sugars, fats, and protein. Those numbers will come out the same between the two. What's the difference between an organically grown and a non-organically grown apple? Why should I care? Why should I pay more at the...
Well, they've actually, I'm somewhat familiar with the what you're talking about there with the apples, I've run across that myself, and the vitamin content in an organically grown apple is much higher.
Vitamins, minerals, yeah.
It naturally occurs on its own, as opposed to the genetically modified one that grows faster and looks prettier, but is pretty much empty of actual nutriment.
So when people talk about nutrition, there's two pieces. There's, of course, the calories that you need in order to maintain your energy balance in your body. But there's also all those small things like vitamins and minerals, trace minerals, phytochemicals, enzymes, those kinds of things that you get from your food. And once you've depleted your soil, for example, vitamin B12 is produced only by yeast and fungi in the soil itself. And so if what you do is you kill off the microflora and microfauna in your soil, then you don't get any vitamin B12. Other things like that are dependent on what's going on in healthy soils. And when you do chemical herbicides, pesticides, and you essentially mine away, produce monoculture where you have no worms, where you have no little critters breaking stuff up because you've hauled it all off site, you don't get that kind of nutrition built into the soil.
Not to mention the fruit itself contains traces of the toxic pesticides.
Okay.
There's that.
They're going to lie about it all the same, but it does.
Yeah. And it's also like dipped in wax and made to look shiny and pretty and sprayed for worms and all that's there.
But again, we have our consumers who are saying, hey, I want perfect apples. I want perfect shiny apples or any other piece of fruit or vegetable. And now if you go organic, you kind of have to tolerate a little bit of some pests that are going to come along, because the object is to minimize the amount that you have to treat, which brings the food, the nutritional value, that sort of second order micronutrients higher. So a lot of it's about attitude.
If the pests are there, then it's safe to eat, because the pest wouldn't be there on the apple if it was covered in poison and spray.
Yeah.
And that's how you can tell if your food's edible.
So
That's good.
So back to why bother occupying the trees as a symbol? I mean, what other reasons are we looking at for why we should be concerned about the health of the environment?
There are no jobs on a dead planet. Yes, the Occupy movement started to bring about economic justice, but economic justice isn't going to get us very far if we can't breathe the air. We've got to survive first.
Yeah. Well, in my lifetime, the air has actually gotten better. I do remember years and years ago where, I would, as we sort of went down, I grew up in Connecticut, so the air was pretty bad, but as we would go into New York City, you could feel it getting worse. And as you would get in, you could rub your forehead, and there was this kind of black ick that would come off, and you'd actually pick it up like that, literally in a matter of a few minutes driving 25 miles into the city. And that air has improved dramatically from what I remember in the late 60s and early 70s in places, New York was the most polluted place that I was in growing up, but I'm sure other cities were, largely similar. But we've cleaned up the air to some extent, and so our own success becomes a problem, because now people say, it's all fine now. We took care of it,
It's all better.
It's all better. Everything's good. So is it all good?
No, it's not, actually. And that's, while you were talking there and we're discussing apples and things of that nature, it brought to mind, there's a list of demands that we've made. Some of them are pretty solid, we're serious about, some of them we're not. But some of the ones that come to the top of my mind are calling for an audit. In the same spirit that Occupy has called for an audit of the Fed, to have the EPA audited, to have the USDA audited, because they are part of that 1% coalition, the little gang that they got going to, exploit us all. And those government agencies, even if they are functioning the way they're designed to, they're kind of impotent, not very effective anyway. If not outright, they just turn a blind eye and just do what they want. no matter how it affects whoever else. So we want an audit, a citizen's audit of the EPA and the USDA to address these issues, address these abuses in an equitable way that does have oversight. I think that's a great way to do it. The other reason for it being is that any of these environmental abuses, when the law does step in and do something about it, here you go, you got to pay a fine. Okay, so here's your $1,000 or $5,000, whatever it is, fine for violating whatever statute. So you and me get that. We go, wow, that's kind of expensive. I shouldn't do that anymore. This is going to totally hurt my business. I got to fix this now. They go, oh, it cost me this much money. Well, we'll jack the price up, make the customers pay for it, just part of our operating cost, and we're just going to continue on.
Yeah, it's budgeted in for fines is now a budget item, line item in the budget for a corporation these days.
That should be illegal. That's criminal. If I've ever seen anything criminal, I mean, you commit one crime against one person, you're going to go do time and be prosecuted. You commit crimes against thousands every day. It's part of your business practice, and you get a.
And that's what Monsanto is most famous for. I mean, they dumped Agent Orange on. They created Agent Orange and dumped it on Vietnam. They've been dumping it on America and us, standing in our organic gardens in the Coast Range for decades. And they're creating the herbicides that the timber industry is using and selling it to the McDougall brothers on a local level. And the helicopter companies are in on it because they get all the money, and that's what we want to make. That's what we want to raise awareness to.
So you've got an issue, say, with the helicopter companies about chemical trespass.
Yep.
In other words, if they spray the stuff in the air, it drifts and it winds up on your land, in your body, in detectable amounts. And one of the things that the Triangle Lake residents are talking about is the state said, oh yeah, we'll run this testing thing and we'll test for groundwater. Now we know that groundwater is not the issue. It's contamination via the air. Given people's experience and how long it takes to get into their systems following a day of spraying. And you can smell it in the air. But they're not looking at the question of transportation or transport of the stuff over the air. And besides which, since now it's been raised and the test is being done, the timber companies aren't spraying the stuff that they're testing for. So funny how that works. You can just clean up your act a little bit and avoid the problem.
And it's just a little bit too. Yeah. I mean, they identified the one thing that they're testing for in those urine samples, and we're just not going to do that one. We're going to do all the other ones, but we're just not going to do that one.
Yeah, I remember bringing that up when when they were setting up all the tests and stuff like that. And yeah, we knew it was going to happen, and then of course the state. You wonder if they're in cahoots or not, because there they are trying to do groundwater testing when in fact it is not being transferred by groundwater. Right. So if they find nothing in the groundwater testing, then can't they conclude that there's no problem?
And they have.
And they have. So interesting how that plays itself out. Yeah. We get the same thing locally. So these items are just it's the same old, whether you're talking about homelessness in Eugene, or you're talking about clear cuts and pesticide spraying.
Totally.
Same set of behaviors.
Yeah, it's the same criminal behavior. It's just in this other way. And the Guy Fawkes iconography that we started out this interview with discussing a little bit has been big, obviously, in the Occupy movement and Anonymous and those groups like that. And in this instance, he was tried and executed for treason, which I find interesting in the here and now, where we're talking about a business practice of treason against everybody. I see Occupy the Trees as a call to up the ante of revolution and ally with nature, ally with our environment, ally with our actual place as human beings on this planet in relation to each other and our environment, and proceed that way. And outright throw off, revolt against all of this that's wrong. We know it's wrong, and it's been wrong, and that's why we've all assembled.
So you brought up the word revolution.
Absolutely.
Okay, now For most people, that's like armed revolution. What's the chance that we could win an armed revolution?
Pretty slim.
An
Pretty
armed
simple.
revolution's not productive.
Yeah, it
Nope.
would be massively difficult and horribly expensive, and I don't see how that would even be possible.
And lots of people would die.
Lots of people.
And
would
the
die.
question is, who would it be that would die? I mean, the corporations have been, funding, for example, Fox News to blame the liberals for everything. So if you got a bunch of gun-toting right-wing Tea Partiers who have been told that liberals are the source of all the problems in the society, when a revolution hits, guess who's going to get wiped out?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So in other words, they've already kind of carried that. Not only did they do the NDAA, which the National Defense Authorization Act, which in sections 1031 and 1032, not only repeals posse comitatus, which was passed at the end of the Civil War, saying that the U.S. military would never again deploy within the United States. They've changed that, so now, of course, it's okay to deploy. And not only is it okay to deploy, but it's okay to disappear people. If you accuse them of being terrorists, that's all you got to do is just say, they're a terrorist, and then you can just disappear them.
And you don't have to give them a trial in that scenario.
Or a charge.
Yep.
Nothing,
as
long as they want.
You're out of
Amazing,
here.
isn't
You're a
it?
bad guy.
Yeah.
That's treason.
And
That is treason.
you know how easy it is to be declared a terrorist. I mean, the terrorist watch list, as they like to call it, is ridiculous. And Occupy being considered that anyway is nonsense. I mean, Occupy London had some problems with that in their neck of the woods being officially identified as a terrorist organization. They're nonviolent. We always have been. This is a nonviolent revolution. This is a people's revolution. None of us carry guns. None of us carry any weaponry. We're not doing that. We carry signs. We carry information. We carry electronic tools to spread that media and spread that awareness. We are here to wake people up and just empower them. They've got the power.
And to go against violence, and because the only violence that has really occurred as a result of Occupy as a general movement is against the occupiers by the police, and it's been well documented, so we don't even really need to speak on the violence. It's all on camera.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've been very good about live streaming things, about videotaping it, putting it up on the internet.
Digital revolution.
It's not, I mean, there's not a whole lot of secrecy going on in the Occupy movement.
No.
And so other issues. I mean, what we've wound up with is in the process of talking about trees and the environment and forest health. We've touched on a lot of other issues because they're all sort of related. It's all one big thing. So other things about why we should care about the environment.
Biodiversity. One of the days during Occupy the Trees is going to be focused on species that are endangered and how we need them. We can't survive as a species without them.
So why should we care if a bunch of dumb birds get wiped out? Huh?
Because the animals that prey on those birds will also die out, and eventually that's going to get up the chain to us.
Or in the other direction, those animals whose populations are kept in check by the predators, the birds that we wipe out, or any other.
Are usually mosquitoes. How much fun will that be?
I always like this one little thing. You talk about the roadrunner and the coyote. Okay, if you wipe out all the coyotes, what's the next species that disappears?
The roadrunner.
Roadrunners.
Starve itself out.
That's because coyotes don't eat roadrunners, but they eat the things that eat roadrunner eggs. And so you wipe out the coyotes, the roadrunners disappear. So,
I didn't know that.
yeah, the collapse of that was studied pretty well in the patchwork development that occurred in Southern California, in San Diego, Los Angeles County, Orange County, where eventually the developments would get to the point where there wasn't enough connected land for a breeding pair of coyotes to survive, at which point the next thing to disappear would be the roadrunners, and then bit by bit the entire ecosystem would begin to collapse. Invasive plants and a lot of stuff like that. Once it's stressed, now you begin to weaken it to the point where a lot of invasives begin to take over.
It's happening all over the world. We're destroying it at an ever-accelerated rate. There's a very popular attitude that we're not animals and that we're above or in control of them somehow, and we're here to say that that's absolutely not true. They depend on us and we depend on them, and that's going to be, I believe, Tuesday or Wednesday.
It's Wednesday.
Animal Rights Day is Tuesday is Animal Rights
Today
Day.
is Animal Rights Day.
So let's go-
Wednesday is Kids Day.
Okay, so let's go.
Not to
through-
be
let's go
confused
through
with
your
each
schedule.
other.
Okay, you're bringing them up day by day, but let's start go right through the schedule.
We have Sunday is the opening ceremonies, the taking of the tree, the kickoff for it. And once tree sitters are there, we'll be addressing environmental issues and kind of just kicking that off with a bunch of fun, music and theater and skits and things like that to have kind of get the ball rolling. And then on Monday is Cascadia Day, where we'll be focusing on local issues, environmental abuses, and how they relate to Occupy as a movement, specifically local Occupy, and environmental groups that are doing whatever in the community and want to speak on that. There'll be lots of those that day. Tuesday, Animal Rights Day, like we were talking about.
And it's also National Animals and Laboratories Day, so we'll be focusing on animals all day and doing something to show support for those animals that are locked away in cages, being a victim to those 1% corps, those corporations. Back to them.
So let's talk a little bit more about that. So we basically have animal testing, and what's that about?
Well, the idea being it's easier to, it's less legally complicated, we'll put it that way. Less legally complicated to test whatever you want on an animal than it is a human being. Animals aren't really given rights, they're property, so you can
And
just do
their
whatever you want.
liability is not an issue. If you kill an animal, you have really no liability for that, where you can go to jail if it's human, so they don't get away with that.
Yeah, exactly.
All funded by the attitude that animals are separate and lesser than humans.
Yeah. Now I remember years and years and years ago, my mother used to be opposed to vivisection. Still going on. Animal testing still going on. So, I mean, she's in her 80s now, and back in her 20s and teens, that was an issue for her.
Right.
So, how much progress have we made there?
Not
No.
nearly enough.
We've lost ground, if anything.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
Actually, there has been some ground made. Procter & Gamble, for at least 30 years, I've been on a boycott against Procter & Gamble because they were at one time one of probably the biggest animal testing unit on the planet. PETA got all over them 20 or 30 years ago, and they've had to actually put programs in force to make it look like they're not doing that as much anymore.
Look like.
We'll let that go with that, but there are actually programs now to work against that, and it's something to be proud of to say on your product that it's not been tested on animals. So there's that. That's the progress.
I don't know if that's actually made less animals being tested on, though.
Well, yeah. Probably not.
Yeah. Hopefully, we would sincerely hope. But, yeah, so
Wednesday?
Wednesday, yes, is Kids Day. And the call out was to have kids as involved in the planning and execution of whatever goes on in their towns for Kids Day as possible. Here locally, one of our own occupier kids is networking with his peers and planning a march. It's going to be awesome. Totally excited for it.
Rally and march after
march,
school on Wednesday going, and there will be dinner for the kids after that because they'll all be starved, and there'll be entertainment throughout that process as well.
Okay. Yep. And so what's going on Thursday?
Thursday is working with Take Back the Night.
Right.
Okay.
It's when we'll be dealing with kind of addressing more of the human equation to this, the human element of Occupy the Trees, and Take Back the Night being obviously for women's rights and things like that, and being safe on the streets after dark. And so being that that's happening there, we are emphasizing that to give kind of emphasis to what they're doing, and also to call attention to the human rights part of environmental abuses. Like I was saying, it was connected. If you're plundering somebody's environment and their ecosystem where they live, you're definitely violating their rights as a human being. So things of that kind of plan. And then Friday is Cascadia Spring, or at least locally anyway. And the idea is we've been kind of dormant through the winter and kind of falling back and regrouping, and spring is here, and the trees and the plants and things are blooming and waking up, and so we should do. It's time for us to get busy.
And I'm supposed to say that there is live music every evening. Thursday and Friday evenings after dinner are going to be our big music nights.
And where's that going to happen?
That will be on the site of Occupy the Trees downtown. And everybody should really come shake their tail feathers, specifically on Monday, Thursday, and Friday. Thursday and Friday is going to be amazing, and Friday night is going to be the closing bash. So everybody that wants to dance and sing and celebrate, come for education, stay for music.
Okay. And my understanding is that's going to actually be at Occupy 5?
No.
No, it's not? It's downtown?
Yes.
Ah, okay.
If we have some kind of emergency inclement weather crisis, we have the ability late in the evening to move any amplified equipment to Occupy 5. Possibly not on Wednesday because of Occupy Education, but if we have a floater, we can go to Occupy 5 if that's deemed necessary at the time, but the music will be on the site.
Floater, huh? As in 6 inches of rain.
No pun intended for the promotion of the local homeboy band Floater.
Right.
But that was.
That that was or was not.
Okay. Yeah, we're finally moving out of it. It's okay to be able to, think that maybe there's a day where you don't have to bring your reindeer to ride your bike these days, which is nice. Summer's coming.
Right.
So we still have about 15 minutes. Other thoughts that you have about the environment, about Occupy, about changing hearts and minds in the world? How should we do that?
Well, as we've been talking, and I'm thinking about how to encapsulate this succinctly, I think it really boils down to that humans and our way of going in this society and this culture has really, we've detached ourselves so far from nature that in our attitudes, in our mindsets, in our beliefs, our worldview, the whole thing is kind of turned on its head. And so if there was one thing to accomplish is to have people reevaluate that, that it is interconnected, and that you are not separate from anything. You're not separate from animals. You're not separate from kids. You're not separate from anything, the trees, or even the animals that you know nothing about. Somehow, some way, that little critter that runs around and has its little life that you don't know anything about totally contributes to your well-being. And you don't necessarily have to know about it, but you do really need to be respectful of it, and understand how it's all wove together, and that there's no compartmentalizing these issues. They cross all borders, and they affect everybody. The 1%'s greed knows no bounds, and it has to be stopped. And that's what we're trying to go for here. And I think if I was going to put emphasis on any one thing, that's what I would emphasize.
But let's take it back to the concept of kids. If you ask kids where food comes from, they'll either say a restaurant or the grocery store. Okay? There's no connection with farms and pastures and all that kind of stuff. And so it's been described as nature deficit disorder.
Right.
And that it's time that we begin to really look at reconnecting the kids with nature, because if they're not connected with it, then the atrocities that have been that have occurred over the last few years, over the last few centuries, are fully justifiable. In other words, if they don't care, they don't care. And so by being disconnected, you create an entire population of people that just doesn't care.
I think a lot of people don't think they can make a difference single-handedly, that they don't know what to do. They realize there's a huge problem and they don't know what to do. And this is the kind of event to come to if you want to plug in on what you can do to make some kind of small difference.
That's actually a good point with the kids. If they're growing up and they are disconnected from nature, and that's totally true. I've seen it myself and studies on it and but if they grow up and they make it all the way through adulthood and they really honestly believe that their steak comes in a styrofoam thing in a plastic wrap and that's the whole process, and they have no idea what happens with that or where their potatoes come from or whatever, then they have no grounds within themselves, no place to start from to even question whether or not what's going on around them is right or something they want to do or be involved in as adults. So run this out another decade and 20 years, 30 years, when that knowledge will become less and less and less common. It's more important to get that done now, especially with this generation of kids. Have them plugged in and realizing that the process that's involved with everything that they consume, everything that they use, just to be aware of it. And so if they wanted to voice a complaint, they could.
One of the Kids' Day events, like during dinner, probably after everything, is they'll be able to watch The Story of Stuff. And The Story of Stuff is, my granddaughter's 6, and she sat down in front of it and didn't move until it was over. And it's a little bit older things, so even the little ones are going to be able to grasp a little bit more about where your stuff comes from.
Yeah. That's Annie Leibovitz, and it's about a 20-minute animation where she's standing in front of an animation, and as she talks and delivers her monologue, things grow in the background. It's really well done.
Yeah.
It's been floating around for a number of years, but she did a nice job on it.
Mm-hmm.
When I heard about there being a Kids' Day, I thought of it immediately, like, yeah, they need to see that.
And if parents want to check that out, it's on YouTube. Like, after the kids see it at Occupy the Trees, they're going to want to show it to them again.
Yeah, you just put in Story of Stuff, and up it comes.
There it is.
Yeah, they haven't been able to hide that one yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's a good one. It's a very good piece.
We'll be doing a rendition of The Giving Tree with a slightly happier ending, possibly. And there'll be people reading the Lorax for like every day.
Okay.
We need volunteers. Anybody that wants to take booth positions, any kind of task points from sanitation to legal secretary, particularly booth positions that want to plug in. We need that. And
so let's talk a little bit about The Giving Tree. What's that about?
It's a story where a little boy ends up having to use his tree as a boat. And I don't really want to elaborate on how that's going to change.
Yeah. So that was actually written by the same guy who wrote that song, The Eyes of Lucy Jordan?
I don't heard that one.
Ah. You guys are too young.
Showing your age, Joe.
So, Shel Silverstein, interesting character. But yeah, he's written a number of children's books, which The Giving Tree is one of them. Really worth reading.
Definitely.
So we've got a week of events with some tree sitting and other such.
There is in the build-up to Sunday, I forgot to discuss this. I believe you spoke earlier with Stan Taylor for the Peace Symposium happening out at Lane Community College. That will be part of the ramp up to this. The actual Occupy the Trees event doesn't happen until Sunday, but there will be a bunch of stuff going on campus for that weekend, particularly the symposium, and then a little bit of Occupy involvement that way out there. Occupy LCC will be doing some rallying and such, kind of promote awareness to the symposium and Occupy the Trees and kind of get that going. So I would definitely encourage folks to go check that out. There's going to be a lot of excellent speakers. Alice DiMaselli's playing. Great musician. Anybody's ever heard
Is she
her?
really?
Yes, a few times. She's
See, I
got a few
just learned
spots.
We
Great.
may have her on site too, if we
Yeah.
can tie her out and get her out there.
That would be excellent.
W-
But so there's that's going on, and then at the end of the conference and the symposium on Sunday, then it'll just dovetail right into the Occupy the Trees kickoff. And so I won't speak too much about it if Stan already did, but definitely would encourage everyone to go check that out. It's going to be very cool.
So that's what, the 19th and 20th? And
20th, 21st, and 22nd up until they're done at 11:30, and then I believe Occupy the Trees will have already kicked off earlier in the morning, but we'll kind of shift in noonish to support that and get in on that.
yeah, because it's my understanding that most of the speakers and the panels there will be talking a lot about Occupy.
Definitely.
I guess in general, Occupy sort of, as they say, took the edge off the despair. In other words, there's a lot of people going, "Oh, we can't do anything about this." But then when it happened, it caught on and really spread pretty quickly because there's a lot of people who've been thinking, something's got to be done, but it's too big to crack. And when Occupy showed up, not just the people who went to the encampments, but other people began to really look and say, yeah, there's some problems here. Even find, some penetration into like the Tea Party, because they're looking at foreclosures, they're looking at bankruptcies, they're looking at a lot of stuff about the government. Here I am at the government. I mean, the government's us, except for the fact that it's been bought and paid for by corporate America. So
Should
got
be
about,
us.
got about another. It should be us. Yeah. Let's go back. I thought about this earlier in the conversation, but there was a notion that sort of came out of the Great Depression called the classic liberal consensus, and it's that government should do three things. It should protect the country from attacks from the outside. It should protect the weak from the excesses of the strong, and it should correct the market failures. And I've always felt that that's a pretty good summary of what I think government should do. But today it's been perverted. Now it's send the army over to beat people up and take their stuff. It's been injustice to the max. In other words, encouraging bigotry, encouraging these kinds of things because it divides and keeps people unempowered, and they're more easily controlled under those circumstances. And then the third thing is that if there's, the purpose of government is to give money and resources to rich people. So in other words, to facilitate the transfer of the common to the uber rich. So we've had a complete reversal of what would be considered the proper role of government, or at least as I see it.
Yeah.
Now, okay, a good right winger might say, "Yeah, man, it's God's plan that the rich should own everything." And I don't.
And if
I
you
don't see
work hard, you just have to work hard,
that. Yeah.
and then you will be rewarded with the 1%.
Just slave away hard enough.
Yeah, just work till you die, and then there's...
Yeah. If you serve your master, you will be rewarded.
Right.
Yes. So, other thoughts? We still have a few more minutes. How'd you get into Occupy? What got you started?
I've been expecting something like Occupy to come along for a while. I mean, people only take so much crap before they've had enough, and it was unclear, and still maybe is. I mean, I'm not necessarily saying that Occupy is that big thing. It may or may not be, but it definitely has shaken some people awake that were sleeping and weren't really watching what was going on, and got them out into the streets and involved in organizing. So it's at least a step in the right direction.
Yeah, but again, if we look at Occupy, and the population of Eugene is 157,000. Our biggest event had 2,000 people in it, which means that 98.7% of the population didn't show up.
Right.
Okay, so how are we going to penetrate into the 98.7?
That's probably our hardest work. I'm a child of the 60s. I remember when people did get pissed and get in the streets and protest Vietnam, and then everybody went to sleep for 30 or 40 years. And that's how I got into Occupy. I was locked and loaded and ready to do this 20 years ago, and I've just been waiting patiently. And I think that how to get people to tie into that is just how have they lost enough yet? Have they paid enough price? Are they without a job? Or is their house being taken? Everybody now has a family member or somebody that has been affected by this tragedy. So that's how we get those people to wake up, stand up, get in the streets, come to a meeting, is that we say, it's time to do something about it. We're over here doing that. And if we cannot look like we don't know at all what we're doing, that we're gaining some momentum, they will join us. That's just the only way I see it happening.
So, Guy, what about you?
We need to keep waking people up. That's just all there is to it. We can't give up. I don't know if it'll work. I don't know how long we have, but I know that we're not going to stop trying. We're going to keep putting the message out there no matter what.
Okay, so here we have it. So what got you started in Occupy? When did you do your first act of social protest? Can you remember back?
1605?
No, you did.
I met somebody out at Lane Community College who was speaking on the Occupy movement and actually looking to recruit people. And so I learned about it that way, and I was just so interested. I had to come check out a GA. I couldn't not. I was intrigued immediately.
How about you? Your first act of social disobedience.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be civil. Doesn't have to get arrested. Just saying no to the system.
Well, with Occupy, actually, Mari and I went to the same ones there, and he's the third GA fella approached me on campus, and hey, there's this thing going on with Occupy, and here's a card, and you should get online and check that out. And so I did. And I'd already been aware of a lot of the material they were talking about, and this being a potential for a problem, like I was saying a moment ago. But here's this group of people on Wall Street who have had enough. And they're in the streets, and they're camping out, and they got signs, and they're doing stuff, and they're speaking out about it. And so I went to a GA here and got to experience that and the consensus thing, and that was kind of the clincher for me, was the empowerment of each person to be able to speak and discuss and make sure that their voice was heard and their considerations were accounted for.
And I think that
you don't see that in two-party government.
I think that just feeling intrigued and showing up at those meetings was very much an act of social disobedience.
Okay. Well, I guess we have a few more seconds, so I'm probably going to have to close this out now. And this has been our 28th episode of Occupy TV. No end in sight on this one. And so come join us next time. And thank you for watching.
There's something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop, children. What's